Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Up first, news media is ever-changing, and now mass layoffs have come to Bell Media, shuttering 2 of its Vancouver radio stations and laying off at TV outlets in BC. We're asking for your thoughts on news consumption. How have your own daily habits changed? And this morning, the evacuation order at Tumbler Ridge was lifted. We'll hear from the mayor of Tumbler Ridge. After 12:30, gardening in small spaces. I'm Michelle Eliot. This is BC Today. Bell Media is cutting 6% of its workforce, and some staff at CTV Newsroom in Victoria are among those being let go. In Vancouver, 2 of its radio stations are closing. And since yesterday morning, here's the message being played on the frequency that had hosted BNN Bloomberg.
As of 8 a.m. on June 14th, CFTE AM 1410 is off air. The realities of AM radio and the broadcast media landscape have made this change unavoidable.
The president of Bell Canada says its news operations are incurring $40 million in annual operating losses. So the foreign bureaus for CTV News in London and Los Angeles are set to close, and the Washington bureau is being scaled back. The cuts have prompted a renewed conversation about the value of local media in Canada and what media organizations need to do to adapt to the modern needs of audiences. We're asking you about this today. How has your own media consumption changed? What do you look for in the outlets that you watch or read or listen to? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm joined now by Brian Weeb. He's head of BCIT's Radio Arts and Entertainment Program. Brian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Your reaction, first of all, to these cuts at Bell Media?
Well, I think it's a sad day in media anytime you see that number of people lose their jobs. But I think that it's something that, especially in Vancouver, with the changes that were made at the radio station, especially the 1040 on the AM dial a couple years ago, it's not really something that was all too much of a surprise, but still really thinking about those that are now out of work as a result of this move by Bell Media.
Sure. And the AM 1410 frequency in Vancouver has quite a storied history, right?
Absolutely, it does. It harkens back to the days of CFUN, which was at one point a juggernaut in rock and roll radio, in top 40 radio, in the market. And the frequency itself hasn't been around for 100 years, but CFUN, as it was known, goes back about a century in Vancouver radio.
Yeah, when you think back to, the late Red Robinson, one of those personalities that Vancouverites will always remember, right? But thinking as well of the CTV Vancouver Island newsroom and the value that it brings to local audiences, what's the impact of something like that?
Well, that's what's really a shame, to be honest, is the fact that, it's impossible to grow an audience by cutting back on local content. In fact, the way to grow an audience and to gain sponsors and partners in the business community is to, in fact, increase that local content. And so that's where it really is sad to see that Bell Media, not only even in Vancouver Island, but when you talk there about shutting down the London and the Los Angeles branches of the CTV national news, well, how do you get a Canadian perspective for a story that's happening, say, in the UK or that's happening in Los Angeles without having that bureau there? Like CTV can't necessarily rely on American outlets to present that content from a Canadian perspective. And so that's something that it befuddles me a little bit in terms of content creation. It doesn't befuddle me in terms of finances.
Okay, so let's get to that in a little bit here. I just want to give the phone numbers out once again, asking you how your own media consumption has changed. What are some things that you look for when you are reading the news, listening, or watching? What's important to you? Is it about being local? Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. And our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. My guest is Brian Wiebe, head of BCIT's Radio, Arts, and Entertainment program. And before I go to our first caller here, Brian, let's talk about the losses there, the finances around this. The president of Bell Canada saying its news operations are incurring $40 million in annual operating losses. Is that what this is really all about?
I think so. But I mean, really for Bell Media, a company like that, its main interest is in mobile. It's not necessarily even in sort of the traditional media space, as it were. And so it's never great for any company to be losing that amount of money. But Bell Media still makes hundreds of millions of dollars every single year. And so I think that with a shift in philosophy, a shift in means of news gathering and that type of thing, that it probably could have been successful in a different way without incurring that amount of loss. Although, I mean, there's no guarantees. It still may have incurred a bunch of losses in terms of dollars and cents, but I still think that maybe there could have been a better way to sort of look at investing in that local audience, that local content, and attracting local partners in the business community.
Let's go to our caller now. Janet is on the line in Nanaimo. Hi, Janet. Welcome to the show. What do you make of these changes?
I really liked 1410 Bloomberg. They had different business reports that you won't get anywhere else. There was some local content. Anthony Gismonti's Food and Wine Show. There was a great guy from Toronto on in the evening, Jim Richards. His show was absolutely fantastic and very Canadian, very Canadian. And then there was Jan Arden on Saturday mornings, and her show was interesting as well. So I am very disappointed. And 1410 has been a staple in the Vancouver area, gone through a number of permutations over the years. Yeah. But I just hope somebody with money picks it up.
And it sounds to me like for you, it's about the personalities, topics, and that coverage you don't get elsewhere.
Yeah, and they used to have that fired guy from CBC that sold the painting to... the former governor, money guy
Evan Solomon.
In Canada. Evan Solomon. And his show was outstanding too, but he jumped ship earlier and moved to New York. So.
Well, you obviously watch these closely, Janet. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks.
That's Janet in Nanaimo talking there about some of her favorites and lamenting the loss of some of the shows that she enjoyed on 1410. Dean is up next now in Hope. Hi, Dean. What are your thoughts on media consumption? Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. I think it's a temporary malaise. I know the bean counters are in control with everything, and so, of course, the money's gone down, so they're going to can it. But personally, I don't think I'm the only one. I'm off internet now in terms of Twitter. I quit when Elon Musk was coming up because I'm not a conservative and I didn't like the way it was heading. I was off Facebook a long time ago. When people are reading the news on internet, they're all in, all focused, and the stress is going through the roof. We know that with people on their devices too much. So I like to listen to the radio, CBC radio, and keep working. So I'm doing two things at once. I'm not just passively on the computer watching, one bubble or the other, like a lot of people are in one or the other. So I think it's a temporary problem. I think radio will always be king because it's probably the best medium out there. So
really interesting what you say about how online news and participation in online and social media has changed things as well, Dean. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Brian Wiebe is with me from BCIT. What do you make of that comment? He says, I now stay off social media, stay off Twitter.
I think that that's something that's becoming a lot more apparent for people when they look at the fact that it's really easy in social media to sort of be in an echo chamber, and I mean, that's one thing that media has always been supposed to be for, is different viewpoints and different perspectives. And sure, you can get that on different radio stations and that type of thing. And there's ones out there that lean left and lean right for sure. And there's some that are right down the middle. But on social media, I think that you do get into that echo chamber situation probably a lot more, especially based on how the algorithms work. And I'm certainly no expert on that, but I do know a little bit about it. And so I think that that's a really good point to make. in the fact that, the more and more that local media gets cut back, the more and more that we're going to miss that kind of stuff, thinking that it will just move to social media or be there on social media is definitely not the case.
Thank you very much for that call, Dean. Rick is up next in the Comox Valley as we talk about how your own media consumption has changed and what is it that you look for in what you read or watch or listen to. Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733 on your cell phone, star or pound 690. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio, live streaming as well on CBC's YouTube page. CBC Vancouver is where you can find us, cbc.ca/BC, and on our website as well, and CBC Gem. Rick is on the line now in Comox Valley. Hi, Rick.
Hi.
Tell me about your own media consumption.
So I'm actually calling because I'm actually, your conversation is making me think about advertising and the business model of media companies. I'm a small business owner, and I listened to an Ideas episode a bunch of months ago, and it was a media industry executive, and he was lamenting the fact that a lot of advertising for the media firms is now going to big tech down in the US. Because that's how people are advertising their services, Google, Facebook, and so on. And so in response to that, I sort of tried to be a good citizen and cut back on my own advertising for my small firm.
Really?
And so I cut back on my Google advertising back to zero, with plans to start to advertise locally in some local magazines. And what I discovered was that my incoming leads sort of dried up overnight. And as a result, I had to, a month later, I sort of said, okay, well, I'm going to give myself a month or two. And I, after that sort of slight slowdown, I switched back my Google advertising. I turned it back on, if you like. And then, hey, presto, all of a sudden I'm getting leads again into my business. And so whilst I would really love to not be giving money over to Google and Facebook, it's a very, very effective means of advertising, of course. And so this talks to me this gets to the heart of the challenge that the media firms have in where people are consuming services.
You point out what an experiment of sorts that you undertook, right, Rick? And very telling as well. Thank you very much for that. Really good to hear from you.
Thanks.
Take care. That's Rick in the Comox Valley. And so advertising, trying to support local media outlets, but really, how do you compete with a company like Google? Brian Weeb is with me from BCIT. What do you make of what that says about the media landscape that we have right now?
Well, I think it's wonderful that Rick tried both and really was astute enough as a business person trying to market his business to do that.
Right.
I think it's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing for everyone. And so there are certain businesses that would perform better, likely marketing to a more predominant, radio audience or a TV audience or a print audience or just a web audience in that case, and there's some that will do better on social media. I think it really just depends on what the marketing mix is for the business, but that's what we talk to our students about in our marketing courses that we teach, is the idea of that mix. It's not necessarily looking at, this is the only one that you should do, because that would be naive. That you can't just ignore the fact that, like the point that Rick made was that, Google ads and Facebook ads and that type of thing can be incredibly effective. But so can a campaign on the radio. So can a campaign on a podcast, for that matter. It's that kind of stuff that there's more and more options than ever to market one's business. It's just a matter of using your own experience and knowing your customers. And sometimes it helps just to ask your customers, what brought you here? Why did you come to my door? And usually it's just to fill a need. And really that's what advertising should do for a business, is fill a need. And so how can you get that message best to new customers and existing customers? And it might be a little bit of everything. It might be one certain thing. It just depends.
I'd love to hear more about what you tell your students in just a moment. But right now, let's go to another call in Victoria. And John is on the line to talk about media consumption. Hi, John. What's it like for you? What's your experience?
Well, I'm an ex-radio guy. So I still listen to radio quite a bit.
Uh-huh.
And your guest touched on something that I think is probably the most important thing that I think the broadcasting industry is forgetting. Radio used to be a 24-hour-a-day medium. You'd be able to rely on the radio. So if there was a problem, whether it be a catastrophe of some sort, you could depend on the radio to go to find information. That's been somewhat usurped, certainly, with the internet now. You find out all that sort of
You
stuff.
get your text alerts and all of that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's been, that position has been somewhat abdicated by radio, and now you have situations where they're cutting costs, and to me, I don't believe they are serving the community as well as they should. The airwaves are public. People or broadcasters or companies have to apply to get the license to broadcast on that frequency. And they put together an awful lot of effort to put in, an application to the CRTC. They go through quite the process.
Right.
But I think the underlying thing is we want to serve the community. And I have a problem with broadcasting companies now where you aren't serving the community when a person in, say, Winnipeg is voice tracking. And what voice tracking is, for those who don't know, it's basically you record the break and the computer runs the break. And the appearance is that it's live, but it's not live. Mm-hmm. So now what you've done is you've eliminated immediate contact. If somebody wants to phone and just find out the weather, as weird as that is, people still phone radio stations to find out what the weather's going to be like. And how can they get that information if nobody answers the phone? Or how about the person in Winnipeg who is voice tracking, say, a radio station in Vancouver? What the heck do they know about Vancouver? What do they know?
Just commenting about the weather and things like that, right?
I guess so.
Yeah.
So that human connection is disappearing. Even just something simple as, gee, that was a great song. And what was that name of that song? Phoning the control room was always, somebody was always there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. And as your guest has suggested, that to serve a community, you can't do it without people in the community who are, reflection of the community. And if a radio station is only live in the morning and, say, afternoon drive, but after that you don't have anybody on from, say, 10 o'clock until 3 in the daytime, and then at 7 o'clock it's a computer running the show from 7 o'clock until the morning show starts again, 7 p.m. until the morning show. It just, to me, it's just been I think a misguided approach due to finding efficiencies, cutting people. Generally the number one cost in any operation, any business, is people. And at some point you cut so much that you cannot effectively reflect or represent or cover the community as a whole.
John, I'm going to thank you very much. You bring up such interesting points there, a former broadcaster as well. Cutting positions, efficiencies, 1,300 positions being cut at BCE, around 3% of its workforce, and selling 9 radio stations, as well as the company plans to significantly adapt how it delivers the news. So that lack of sense of community and connection was really apparent in the point that John was raising there. Thanks so much for your call. Candace is on the line. We're getting a lot of calls on this, so I'd like to get them all in as well in this half hour. Candace is calling us from Pender Island. Hi, Candace.
Oh, hello. I'm phoning in because of the public safety component. Some people can't use computers, so it's really easy to turn on a radio. And I don't know if I should even say this, and I'm going to get everybody going on this one, but guaranteed, if the Conservatives get in, the first thing they're going to hammer at is the CBC. They want to get rid of that so bad. And if we get our news from the internet only and go down rabbit holes to get our news, There's no local. There's no safety protocol. There's nothing combining us in our sovereignty of being Canadian. I mean, the local news is crucial, and I do local. Yes, I do. Yeah. I'm a CBC fanatic. I love CBC, and people are saying, "Oh, it's this," and "Oh, it's that." No, it's who we are. Okay. We're Canadian, and we don't mind me, but I'm sort of repeating what I said to the other fellow, and I'm trying to get it all in here really quickly so other people can speak. But seriously, we cannot be dominated by American news. You turn on a channel in BC, and you're getting American channels, and the internet. I mean, everybody's in competition. It is about money, but it's also about power. Yeah. And we need to have a voice in this world and not just be listening to any rabbit hole we go down, Candace, which is all fake. Okay, I'll let you go.
Thank you very much. Rabbit hole. You know, we heard from someone earlier saying, nice to hear from you.
Yeah, no kidding.
We heard from someone earlier saying they've changed their own consumption. They're no longer on social media because of that tendency toward rabbit holes and echo chambers. And again, Candace talking there about local and community connection. Our last caller now is Kathleen in Prince Rupert. Hi, Kathleen. Welcome.
I'll try to be quick, too. My concern is I'm wondering if CFTK in Terrace is affected by these cuts. The only way to get that CTV television, or CFTK it's called, and it's a CTV affiliate, is through what do you call it? Satellite, not satellite, cable or online. So people in the past here have had Rabbit Ears TV available, and Robert Pictou does a really good show out of there. And we were watching news, but we haven't been able to get it. And so I'm wondering about CTV, CFTK, and Terrace, an affiliate of CBC, or CTV rather. Mm-hmm. And then I'm also wondering where BCIT graduate journalists go off to work.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to put that to our guest, Brian Weeb, in a moment. As far as we know right now, what's being reported is some staff at the CTV newsroom in Victoria are among those being let go. Kathleen, thank you very much for your call. And a couple of emails here before I go back to my guest to wrap up. James writes, my wife listens to AM radio exclusively because of the multicultural stations. 1470 AM and 1320 AM are both on the AM band, although 1470 also has an FM presence. She hopes that the AM band survives. Jashandeep writes, I myself enjoy listening to BNN 1410, but this is what happens in a business. The only constant is change. On that, a couple more questions for you. Brian Weeb, my guest, head of BCIT's Radio Arts and Entertainment program. The only constant is change. Obviously, we here are also adapting. We have a live stream that we just started of this program. What do you tell graduates from BCIT?
Well, that's exactly what we tell them. And I mean, really, that I'm an alumnus of our program, and that hasn't changed for me since I graduated 20 years ago. The fact is that the industry is always changing, and you'd be hard-pressed to find one that isn't changing at least a little bit all the time, and some change faster than others. And I think that that's the thing that we mention to our students. Now, for our program specifically in radio arts and entertainment, we don't focus on the fact that, hey, you're going to graduate and go get a job in radio. We're saying you're going to graduate and have skills in performance, in production, and in storytelling. And those skills can translate to a lot of different industries in media and outside of media. And so that's the message that we try to send to them, is that you have this toolkit that you're able to take and use in a lot of different ways.
I'm a graduate of BCIT myself, the broadcast journalism program. Brian, good to have you with us. Thanks so much. My pleasure, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me on. You take care. Brian Weeb, head of BCIT's Radio Arts and Entertainment program. It's 12:30 now, 1:30 in the Mountain Time Zone. You are with CBC Radio's BC Today. You can listen to us on the CBC Listen app, online as well, cbc.ca/BC, and you can watch us online. And you can also catch us on YouTube. CBC Vancouver is the page, as well as the CBC Gem app. You can watch us on a whole bunch of different platforms. Very good to have you with us this afternoon. Coming up in our next half hour, we're going to hear from the mayor of Tumbler Ridge. The evacuation order there has been lifted as of 10 a.m. a.m. this morning. We'll hear more about that. And we'll talk about gardening. Well, what's it like for you? What do you get out of gardening? And what about if you have small spaces, no big yards, no big gardens? How do you get your gardening fix in? We'll have that conversation coming up after this CBC News update. And here's Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. As Michelle mentioned, people pushed out of their homes in Tumbler Ridge are now returning. An evacuation order issued a week ago has been rescinded. A wildfire came within 4 or 5 kilometers of the community, but the recent rain and cooler temperatures have eased the immediate threat. The village of Lytton is ending its state of local emergency. That comes 2 years after it was enacted. The village was destroyed by wildfire and still faces a long rebuilding period. And the Vancouver Police Department plans to launch a pilot program this year in which about 100 officers will wear body cameras during patrols. It's in response to the recommendations from a coroner's inquest into the death of Miles Gray. And now taking a look at the forecast on the North Coast. Windy this afternoon with periods of rain and a high of 10. Highs reaching 21 with widespread smoke and some sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, sunny this afternoon with local smoke and a high of 23. Highs in the low 20s with smoke and sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, sunny with a high of 27. And mainly cloudy this afternoon in the Fraser Valley. A bit of sunshine in Metro Vancouver and Greater Victoria with highs around 19. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
I can't remember if you are a gardener and if you have any...
I try to avoid it. I have a garden. I'm not crazy about it, I gotta say. Seems like a chore to me.
It seems like you have strong feelings about it.
Well,
You're
yes,
not just indifferent.
It cuts into my tennis time, so yes.
Yeah, okay.
I don't feel that good about it.
I shudder to think what it
do?
looks like out there.
It doesn't look the best. The backyard doesn't look the best. The front yard's pretty good.
There you go.
Backyard.
I have a plant in the corner of my living room that's not doing so well, so I'm not judging you.
Oh, well, yeah, that doesn't sound that good. I mean, an indoor plant, I mean, that's really... That shouldn't take much work,
That's
Michelle.
a pretty low bar, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
I know. I'm too ashamed to ask Brian Minter because he'll just shake his head.
I'm sure he'd be willing to help.
You can do better than that.
Yeah.
Rob, thank you very much.
Sure thing.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Nothing cuts into his tennis time, by the way. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, as well as live streaming on CBC Vancouver's YouTube page and cbc.ca/BC. You can listen on the CBC Listen app and watch us on CBC Gem. Onto the wildfires now in BC. While new wildfires have already made their mark this summer, the aftermath of those from years past is still top of mind. Council in Lytton has voted to stop renewing a state of local emergency that began on June 30th, 2021, when a wildfire almost completely destroyed the village. Right now, I'm joined by CBC's Zara Premji for more on this and what it means. Hi, Zara. Tell us, what do we know about this decision?
Hi, Michelle. Well, what we do know so far is the decision was made last night. So Mayor and 4 council members, hands up in their Zoom video, they decided the state of local emergency could come to an end. Now, it's been renewed every week so far for just under 2 years. As you mentioned, June 30th marks 2 years. So we are just coming up on that right now. We have heard that people are excited to return. There were 250 people roughly living there at the time. Some have moved on. Some are deciding to come back. It's going to be interesting to see what happens now that this decision has been made. And as of Monday, basically, that state of local emergency is over, evacuation order over, Michelle.
And so what are you hearing from Lytton residents? You mentioned some excitement there. What does it mean for the community?
Yeah, I spoke to a woman who actually is the former mayor of Lytton, I think 3 times over, and she just said, I just found out. I just found out moments ago. I cannot wait to go back. I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to it. It's time to rebuild. Then I spoke to Danny Yan. I don't know if our listeners and viewers might remember Danny. Danny is the owner of the Lytton Hotel. It was obliterated, much like basically the rest of Lytton as it got flattened out 2 years ago. Danny found out when I called him. So he had no idea this decision was made last night. And he was overjoyed. You could barely understand what he was saying. He was so excited over the phone. He wasn't able to talk long, but I did ask him, Danny, what's next? He said, I want to rebuild. So he's very excited. And we did also, of course, speak to the mayor as well. And the mayor says, Now it's time to go back. We have hope. So take a listen to what the mayor said.
They can get things going, get work happening on their properties. Now, saying that, there is some backfilling that needs to be done on lots, which means replacing the soil that was taken out. So that work is going to continue. There are a bit of shovel testing happening around the contaminated soils in some areas. And then, of course, there is some sections where there's still ongoing archaeology. Those areas will be fenced off. But yeah, I think it's also just a state of mind for people, right? It's that sense of hope that, this soul has been lifted.
Yeah.
We are not in a state of local emergency.
So it sounds like still some work ahead for sure, but for now, this gives people a sense of hope at being able to return home. Zara, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Zara Premji reporting live for us. It's 12:36 now, 1:36 in the Mountain Time Zone. And as well, as of 10 a.m. this morning, the evacuation order at Tumbler Ridge was lifted. About 2,400 residents of Tumbler Ridge were ordered to flee last week due to the nearby West Kiskatinaw River wildfire. An evacuation alert, though, remains in place. As for roads, Highway 52 North, the Heritage Highway from Dawson Creek is now reopened. Highway 52E is open from Kelly Lake to Tumbler Ridge. Daryl Krakauka is mayor of Tumbler Ridge.
We just really ask our residents to take their time driving back. We understand everybody's excited to get home, get to their houses, check on their houses or their pets if they had to be left behind, because cats were outside and stuff, so they weren't able to take them. But we just ask them to be very patient on the way coming home. When they do arrive, we know anxiety is high and stress is high. But again, we just ask them to realize that, we are a community and we understand that. But if we can just be, nice to our neighbors and realize we're all here and we're one big family here to help you.
That's Daryl Krakauka, mayor of Tumbler Ridge. We'll continue to stay on that story for you and on the ongoing wildfire situation around BC, right here on BC Today, on CBC Radio, and live streaming, of course. 12:37 now, 1:37 in the Mountain Time Zone. All right, so I mentioned Brian Minter, our gardening columnist, of course. Now, he's not going to join us this week, but we know that gardening is a well-loved pastime in this province and a big topic for you. Many British Columbians, though, are not able to plant their own gardens, perhaps because of a lack of space or living in an apartment building, or because of a lack of time or money. Well, we'd like to hear from you. Is that something that's holding you back? Were you hoping perhaps to start gardening but don't know how? Do you struggle with that limited amount of space and want to know what you can do? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, on your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And I have two guests with me in studio here. Emma Tanaka is garden director at Van Dusen Botanical Garden. Olivia Wu is president of Garden Bank Conservation Society. Welcome, good afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for joining us. I want to hear all about being in high school. Olivia, members of Garden Bank are in high school. You're a grade 12 student. What does that mean?
Yeah, so high school is definitely pretty exciting. And it's like... I'm pretty excited to go on to my next stage, which is university. And in fact, a lot of members of Garden Bank go on to university to even do greater changes for climate change. So for instance, one of the members is going to urban forestry, where she will be investigating more plants and gardening.
Wow, and so for you, it's about looking to the future and climate change.
Yes, definitely. So for Garden Bank, our goal is to promote sustainability while also helping with the educational aspect of sustainability and also humanitarian aspects. So we do have an environmental workshop teaching our younger generations like how to be more sustainable and how to garden in their own backyards.
You know, my son was saying to me this morning, I have a few friends in Garden Bank. Do you find a lot of young people are interested?
Yeah, so like young people, definitely when we first tell them about Garden Bank, they kind of
They look a little
deter from
suspicious,
it.
little side eye at you.
Yeah, they're like, oh my God, gardening is so boring. It's for old people, right? But then later on, after they find out that their friends are in there, and then their friends like post on social media about how they're actually having so much fun gardening, and afterwards, there's like even more people joining the Garden Bank team.
Okay. See, we were talking about social media earlier, but there's the positive side of it, being encouraged to do some gardening. Emma Tanaka is with me as well, garden director at Van Dusen Botanical Gardens. Emma, you work as well with Garden BC. How can people without gardens, but are really interested, how can they get started?
Well, gardening is just something that all different people from different ages can really start to get into and really enjoy. And one thing that's really great is with gardensbc.com, we just launched a website. It provides so many different resources for people to go onto the site and learn about all the different gardens that they can visit across the province. And we also have a blog on that website that has Brian Minter, who's one of the writers.
Of course it does.
Of course. And provides the public with a lot of different articles and different types of writings about gardening tips, how to create your own garden, how to start. One thing that's really great about gardens at the moment is that so many of them are doing lots of different programming and lots of different classes for the public.
Okay.
And that focus on not just plants and gardening, but also just about conservation, sustainability, biodiversity. So there's quite a lot of different topics that they cover. So
How much does that play a role then, the conservation piece of it?
it's really top of mind for everybody in the industry, and I know that a lot of gardens are changing their practices to reflect the impacts of climate change. So a lot of the instructors that are instructing a lot of the educational components of the programs at gardens, they certainly keep that top of mind and try and incorporate that into all the different types of teachings and classes that they provide.
If I'm someone in Vancouver who has an apartment and perhaps just a little patio, where do I start?
Well, gardensbc.com, that
What would
has
we
that
see
resource.
there? What kind of advice?
You would be able to go on to the different garden links and to be able to find out what kind of programs and classes that they offer.
Okay.
And a lot of them do offer, how do you garden in small dwellings and in
Right.
urban dwellings? Because it is something that is really challenging and difficult at the moment. And I think that once you start reading and looking into different types of programming that's available, you can really kind of open your mind and see what's possible within your space, because it really depends on how big your space is.
Olivia, what do you like to garden?
I actually like to garden things that we can eat. So,
okay.
Yeah, I'm a big foodie, so I like to garden, for example. I start off with easier things like lettuce, kale, even tomatoes, and now I'm trying to explore even more cultural, diverse species and more native species. Like as you can see in our garden, we have pollinator-friendly plants in store for the garden.
Yeah. And what does your space look like then?
Oh, yeah. So for the Garden Bank Conservation Society, we are an organization in the Greater Vancouver area, so we do have gardens in high schools as well as elementary schools. As we said, we had like environmental workshops in elementary schools where we help them garden in their gardens, and then we also kind of help in a monastery at Richmond. Yeah, and then over there we help with their orchid and garden space.
Okay.
So there's a lot of variety.
And Emma, what about the role of gardening in mental health?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know that during the pandemic, obviously we didn't have a lot of tourists that were coming to the gardens, but we had a lot of local residents that were coming out to green spaces and parks and gardens. And I think that everyone really kind of understood the value of being outdoors, being in gardens, being close to nature and connecting with nature. Because gardens really provide that physical connection to that natural world. And that's something that's so important to our mental health and mental wellness. So I think now more than ever, a lot more people are really looking to be outside more, to do more gardening and just connect with nature.
That's so important, isn't it? Seeing that sort of forest therapy that we often hear about being
Absolutely.
outside. We want to hear from you. Are you hoping to get started with gardening? And perhaps there are some things that are holding you back, whether it's space or time or money. I'll ask you about time, how to find time in just a second here as well. But we'd love to hear from you if this is something that you would like to get going in your own life, gardening. You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. On your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. All right, so if I'm someone who would like to get started with gardening, but time is so short, my days are very busy. How do I try to manage that?
Well, I think once you start finding like a passion and a hobby, you find time. So oftentimes when you're off work and then you go home, obviously just during the weekends, what you do is you try and incorporate that into your lifestyle and into your day. And oftentimes gardening is really therapeutic. So people are looking to decompress from after they come back from work or after a tough day. So a lot of that time is kind of created and carved out. And again, going back to mental wellness and mental health, that all plays a part. So I think once you get into the love of gardening, you will certainly create time for it.
It just feeds itself. And Olivia, my son, I've been talking to him about this as well. Things are busy right now, right? It's the end of the school year.
Yeah.
And so things are really busy. You've got end of year concerts and exams and all of that. How do you find time to garden?
Yeah, so as Emma said, time can be carved out. Also, I found that gardening, it's not only just having time to garden, but also having time to garden with your friends, and having like these fun activities with your friends can also make garden super fun. And it's just a time where you have that can be fun, and it's not just an old person activity.
No, I don't think so. I think that is an assumption perhaps that's long past now, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, when we do our Brian Mincher segments, we certainly get calls from all ages, all across the spectrum. So I do find people are really, really interested. And for you, it's about gardening things that you like to eat, right?
Yes. So after like a long session of a lot of different garden sessions and getting that piece of lettuce that grew from a seed, it's like really fulfilling and a satisfying experience. And yeah, I find that the gratification you get from gardening is definitely worth it.
Wow, and grade 12 as well. And Emma, what about the role of agriculture and the overall farming in BC?
Yeah, at Van Dusen, we have a vegetable garden, and so we've always had a vegetable garden to be able to obviously combine with a lot of the programming that we do at the garden, and so it's such an important piece. And often with our vegetable garden, we have different themes and different ways that we educate the public about food security, sustainability, and what kind of local produce that you can grow on your own if you'd like to. So all of that has always been quite important in terms of our mandate at the garden, and I know that a lot of different gardens also have that same mandate. So it's really great to see. And
it's such a big concern right now, right? Food insecurity. So to have that
Absolutely.
be part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
And gardening and being able to make your own. Go ahead. Yes.
No, I was just going to say, and a lot of obviously universities like KPU and UBC, they also have a lot of different horticultural programs where a lot of people can, if you have that interest, to learn more and to educate yourself and to probably, go into that profession if you like. Like there's lots of different resources out there where people can, find different opportunities.
Do you think you'll go into this?
Yeah, so I applied for molecular biology as my university
Same
major.
thing, yeah.
Oh, really? And then, so I would definitely want to get into like gardening and how bacteria can affect gardens.
That is so cool.
And a lot of our members are also going into related fields. Yeah, such as urban forestry, which I talked about earlier.
That's really, really cool. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Congratulations on graduating.
Thank you so much.
Very nice to have you both with us.
Thank you very much.
Emma Tanaka is Garden Director at Van Dusen Botanical Garden, and Olivia Wu is President of Garden Bank Conservation Society, and the website again for people to go to if they'd like to learn more about gardening.
Gardensbc.com.
Gardensbc.com. You can find all the tips there on how to get started, whether you're short on time and on space. You can find lots of tips on gardensbc.com. It is 12:50 now, 1:50 in the Mountain Time Zone here on BC Today. And time for some emails now. We spoke yesterday about how transportation isn't meeting the needs of British Columbians, and here's what some people had to say. Leanne in Gibsons wrote, there are 32,000 residents on the southern part of the Sunshine Coast and 20,000 in the Powell River area. Neither area has an alternative road access out, nor an alternative road between communities. There's only a single highway in most areas. There have been historic fires that burned large areas in the past. The only emergency planning suggests simply moving from one community to another along a single road. And Deborah wrote, as a resident of the Boundary area, in the winter we use Highway 3 and 33 quite a bit. However, the trees along these roads cause winter driving to be, at times, treacherous. The sun melts the snow on the pavement and the trees shade it, causing ice. I think in areas where possible, the trees should be logged back to a respectable distance from the highway. I believe the road maintenance would lessen as less sand would be needed. In recent years, a woman was killed by a falling tree, and there are many trees that fall toward the road in the winter. Thank you very much for all of your emails. It's BC Today on CBC Radio, and BC Today at cbc.ca is where you can reach us. A lot of emails coming in as well on our topic in our first half hour. And we were talking about media consumption in light of cuts coming to Bell Media. And they are closing 2 radio stations in Vancouver and cutting some jobs at CTV on Vancouver Island as well. We were asking you how your own media consumption has changed and what you look for when it comes to what you read, what you listen to, and what you are watching as well. So we're going to take more of your emails on that, BC Today at cbc.ca. We'd love to hear more of your thoughts. Well, to another type of travel now. Frustrated families are speaking out about Canada's Nexus application process, saying they have waited 2 years to get cards approved for their young children. That's double the amount of time Ottawa says the process should take. As Michelle Eliot reports, many feel there's little to no transparency about what's taking so long.
Since almost the day he was born, 2-year-old Louis Jensen has been on a wait list. The toddler needs to be vetted by Canadian and American federal agents so he can get a Nexus card.
He's a 2-year-old. You know, what possibly could he have on his history that would, be a concern? I don't know why it's taking so long to process children's applications. It should be simple.
Nexus card holders get access to an expedited customs lane. But without a card for little Louis, the Jensens often face hours-long waits while traveling to visit their grandparents in Blaine.
My husband sometimes will bike down and go through the bike lane because that's always a bit faster. My daughter and I will go through the Nexus lane together. It's just, it really feels like an unnecessary burden given that we all have Nexus. He's a 2-year-old. He doesn't have a criminal history. Let's get the ball rolling on it.
The Canadian Border Services Agency said in a statement, applications should take 12 to 14 months. That's half the time the Jensens have waited. A backlog of applications during the pandemic and a temporary shutdown of the program caused the Nexus waitlist to swell to 295,000 in May of 2022. A year later, that backlog has yet to be cleared, with more than 276,000 still pending.
The concept of an interview for an infant is hilarious.
Tammy Yesrobi has been waiting 6 months for an update on her baby's card. She points out young children aren't even required to fulfill most of the application requirements.
You can't even do the biometric piece, right? So they can't do an iris scan. They can't take their fingerprints. You've interviewed me. You've interviewed my partner. What is it that you're learning about a baby that requires this extended wait time?
The CBSA said it doesn't sort applications by age, that it is required to make sure no custody arrangements are in place for a child, which can extend processing time. Michelle Eliot, CBC News, Vancouver.
Thanks to Michelle Eliot for that story. And yes, back to our emails now. We spoke about the changing scope of media in this province and the country, but what about books? Some sad news now. Book lovers on Vancouver's west side are saying goodbye to a popular outpost. For 2 decades, Pulp Fiction was a space known for curated and rare books in Kitsilano. Well, Benit Brach went to the location to hear more about why this one shop is closing.
Pulp Fiction Books is closing its doors in Kitsilano after 21 years.
And we thought, it's like, okay, times have changed. We need to change with the times. We want to keep serving our clients, and we're able to do that, but without these additional costs of operating. Most retailers are moving towards some kind of hybrid model, combining a smaller brick and mortar footprint with online ordering, mail order.
Brayshaw says foot traffic in the neighborhood has dropped in recent years, and many customers are choosing to order books via their delivery service instead. And when the building's owner proposed a rent increase, he decided it was time to leave.
One of my favorite clients has a phrase that she dropped on me one day. She said, "I am my own book club." And many of my favorite customers from the Kitsilano store were their own book clubs. They were intensely into reading.
This customer has been coming to this bookstore for over a decade.
I think pretty sad, to be honest. I'm pretty upset. I literally, on this chair actually, what I used to do is I'd go around to all the different areas, and this is especially when I was getting into reading and I was like voracious, and I would get all the different copies and I would put them on this chair, and I'd end up getting stacks like this tall. They're kind of used. You find a lot of gems here. So things with beautiful covers, old editions. Otherwise, I really just like the environment. You walk through the books. It's lovely.
And as these shelves empty, Brayshaw says there will be no layoffs and staff will relocate to other locations or work on special orders. Benit Brach, CBC News, Vancouver.
Thanks to Benit Brach for that. Couple of minutes left in the show here, and yes, emails coming in on your media consumption. Marjorie writes, online items are great, though digitized versions of traditional media. Not social media, though, which can be expressions of people's views instead of trying to be unbiased. I hope radio never dies. Anne writes, since the switch from AM to FM several years ago on some stations, transmission has deteriorated to the point that it is often impossible to actually follow the voices. One has to turn up the radio to hear the responses, to the point where it's too loud when the interviewer comes back on. And if I thought it was poor in the city, now that we are quite rural, at times it is terrible, frequently cutting out and unavailable. And the same thing happens when we travel in the interior. Often we can't locate a channel, and when we do, the interference is significant. Consumers in rural areas need access to. Well, thank you very much for that, Anne, and all of your emails to bctoday@cbc.ca. And to recap as well, as of 10 this morning, the evacuation order issued June 8th for the district of Tumbler Ridge has been rescinded. An evacuation alert remains in place for an area that's, if you look on the map, identified in yellow, and that will remain in place indefinitely. Highway 52N from Dawson Creek is now considered safe and reopened, and Highway 52E is open from Kelly Lake to Tumbler Ridge. So some important information for you there as we continue our coverage of the wildfires around BC. Thanks so much for listening to BC Today and watching us as well on the live stream. I'm Michelle Eliot. Have a great afternoon. We'll talk tomorrow.